Welcome. Welcome everybody to today's lunchtime webinar. And today we're focusing on a brand new topic for us, which is becoming a net zero carbon college. So this is one of a series that we've been running. We've had one on becoming a net zero carbon diocese, a school, a church, and today on becoming a net zero carbon college. So really we're focusing today on sort of how to get started if you know that you want to move your TEI towards becoming net zero carbon. What does that mean? What kind of practical changes does that involve? How do you know where to start? How do you work out your carbon footprint? What resources are there to help you? So I hope you find it a really helpful session today. We always begin our webinars with the preview of upcoming attractions, and these are the webinars that we've got coming up over the next few months. We have a session on April the 20th on preaching for God's world with an international panel of speakers talking about why we need to preach on creation care and ideas on how to do it. And we've got speakers from Brazil, Kenya, Polynesia, the UK and the USA. So it should be a really interesting session. After that, we're back onto some of our bricks and mortar sessions. So we've got 2 dates of our session on church solar panels. It is aimed at churches, but for those of you joining from colleges, I'm sure there would be a lot of use in there for you as well. And repeating our sessions on church heating, replace or not to replace, and choosing the right heating solution. Again, that's aimed at a church audience, but I think there would be some information there that would be relevant to colleges as well. Hot off the press, Joe only arranged this yesterday, so we haven't opened the bookings for it yet, but we're doing a session on the 18th of May about the Great Big Green Week and how to use that to engage our local politicians. Then when we hit June, it's the 3rd year that we're running Churches Count on Nature all around the country, and alongside that we're doing our national webinar programme on different aspects of land and nature each day, for churchyard management, a whole range of good examples of different types around the country on the Tuesday. On the Wednesday, our lead bishop on the environment, Bishop Graham Usher, is running a session on paying attention to nature. Eco Church Land on the Thursday, and the big picture really on Friday. So global to local, tackling the twin crises for climate and nature, from Diocesan Environment Officer Pete Brotherton, who is the Director of Climate Change at Natural England. And it's not a webinar, but just also to add in here that we're running our Church of England heat pump training on the 30th of March and on the 5th of October. I'll put links in with details of how to book all of those sessions, apart from the one on the Great Big Green Week, into the chat when I have finished. In terms of the housekeeping, it's the usual way that we run all of our webinars. So we'll be using the Q&A for questions rather than the chat. So please do put your questions in the Q&A, and you can do a thumbs up next to questions that you see there that colleagues have added, and those ones will get the most votes will go to the top. After the webinar, I will send everyone who has registered the slides, and we are recording today's session, and it will be shared on our website and also on our YouTube playlist. Most importantly, who are you hearing from today? So there are 3 speakers on the panel. My colleague Joe Chamberlain, who's the National Environment Officer at the Church of England's National Environment Programme. And then we're going to hear from 2 colleges about what they've done and the difference that it's made. So first you'll be hearing from Reverend Mark Powley, Principal at St Hild's, and then from Jeremy Heuslein, Ordinand at Ripon College, Cuddeston. So let me stop sharing my slides and hand over to Joe, who can lead us away.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. A few clicks, get there. There we go, hopefully you can see that.
Yep, all good.
Lovely. So welcome everyone. I just want to acknowledge at the beginning that I know there's a lot of people here from colleges that are not just Church of England colleges. So although the route map that we're talking about has been written for COV colleges, we hope that there's an awful lot of interesting and useful and practical ideas in it that you'll be able to apply to your college as well. So just because it's the Church of England's route map doesn't mean that you can't steal all of it. Please do. We'd love that to happen. So as Catherine has said, today's speakers are me, Mark and Jeremy. I'm going to talk about the route map as we've established it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the network that we're trying to develop for theology colleges, and some news about the Eco Church Award. And then Mark is going to talk about what he's been up to at St Hild, and Jeremy is going to talk about what he's been up to at Ripon College, Cuddeston. Well, not just them, but them and their team. So it'd be really interesting to hear all of that. So a brief history of the route map. So I'm going to gallop through all of this, but if you haven't heard about our route map before or want a bit more detail, then we do have a webinar which goes through it in detail, which Denise did last year. So when you link to the list of webinars that Catherine will share later, you'll see it. And we started with a synod motion in February 2020, which recognised that the global climate emergency is a crisis for God's creation and a fundamental injustice, and it called for a plan of action to achieve year-on-year reduction in emissions to achieve net zero by 2030. And that included theology colleges in that call to all parts of the Church of England. So then we worked to produce a route map, which was an answer to that call for a plan of action. That route map went out to consultation over winter last winter, and various changes were made, including a big consultation with theology colleges. And so then we produced, so that was a consultation. And then in July 2022, the finalised route map was taken to General Synod and was approved there. The motion was passed, and since then we've been working to design a more polished version of the document, which you can see here. And then from there, we created some short, what we're calling stakeholder packs. So one of our stakeholders is you, the colleges, and that will summarise the points that are relevant just for you. So you don't have to wade through the whole thing to find out which bits apply to you. So there's a pack for theology colleges, and there's one for dioceses, one for cathedrals, one for schools, and one for churches. So each of those areas have their own milestones, and these are the ones that are specific to theology colleges. They were drawn up in consultation with the colleges themselves, mainly drawn from a conference which has developed into that environment network, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So these milestones do come from the colleges, but I think it's fair to say that the route map is probably, this particular part of the route map is probably the least developed of all of our route maps. So the first one is where everyone really needs to start, which is that net zero action plan. And we have got another webinar, which is specifically about how on earth do you go about getting your net zero action plan going. And I think we'll also hear when Mark and Jeremy talk, they'll be talking about this. Where did they start? How did they start planning? And I hope that as colleges, because you'll have different challenges to churches and dioceses, that you'll be able to support one another and share your ideas and share your plans and your actions. So I'm just going to digress at this point and tell you about the Theology Colleges Environment Network. So this group is, this is definitely not just Church of England. This group covers people from all denominations and not just England either. And there's groups from Wales. I don't know how much contact we have with colleges in Scotland, but I know there's somebody here today, so that's lovely that you're here today. And it's definitely better for being ecumenical. So while the net zero target and the route map might be Church of England, we hope the resources are useful for everyone because all denominations have made challenges and targets for themselves and are working to reduce emissions. So we've formed an informal network of support and sharing on environmental issues. And what we hope is that every college will be able to be represented when we meet. Our next meeting is on May the 11th, and when you get the slides you'll have the link. That's the registration link, so you can come and join and we'll all come together. And this group has tried to develop different streams of work. So we have a stream that's looking at curriculum and formation. How do we get environment threaded through our curriculum and also threaded through the life that colleges live together? Even non-residential colleges have a life of community, and where does environment issue fit into that as well? Then there's a strand which is looking at the net zero carbon challenge and how do we decarbonise our buildings. There's another strand that is looking at eco college and trying to look at the A Rocha UK church criteria and say, how does this apply more specifically to colleges so that we can have an award scheme that's geared directly to theology colleges. And then there's another strand on research, although that group is really thinking again about what its purpose is, but it's still thinking at the moment. And the eco college one sort of cuts across all of these because curriculum and formation, as well as net zero and land and buildings, and who we are and how we live together feeds into that criteria. So different people here might be interested in different streams of works. And we hope that there'll be someone from every college who'll be able to come to this network. But if you're interested in one strand and somebody different in your institution is interested in the other, then of course you can send more than one. And my vision for the net zero group, which is the one that I'm most involved with, is that becomes a place where people can share those net zero carbon action plans that we've just talked about, and it becomes a sort of a peer support group. So that is the Theology Colleges Environment Network. Back to the milestones. So by the end of 2023, you've got your net zero carbon action plan. So by the end of 2024, the milestone is that for environment to be incorporated into the teaching. So that's very much the part of the vision of the curriculum and formation strand of the TCEN, and that strand is being led by Margot Hodgson, and there's lots of energy around that. To a lot of ideas coming out of that group. The next one is switching to a green energy tariff, which sounds easy, but we know in the current climate with energy prices, it's been tricky. So we're hopefully by 2024, things will have settled down, but we're aware that there's possible that it might not be as easy as that. So this milestone, we're going to keep an eye on what's happening in the energy market. I'm going to come back to 4 and 5. So Eco Church Bronze and your travel and expenses policies. By the end of 2025, no new oil boilers. This is another milestone that we might need to keep an eye on because it's a little bit dependent on government policy. It might be the case that by 2025, the government has decided we're not having new gas boilers either. And when those sorts of decisions get made, that makes it easier for colleges to follow because the market follow. And if plumbers know they can't install new gas boilers, they'll have new policies and not policies. The government does the policies, the plumber does the actual thing. So if the policy change, then the market follows. But if it doesn't change, then the market is a bit behind. So again, we'll need to watch out what's happening to that. And then you can see what I mean about the milestone not being fully formed, because the next one is actually, right, we're there, we've done it. You made your plan and now we've made it. So I hope that as we go through the next 7 years that we can fill this out a bit more and have more guidelines as to where you go with your college. And I hope that you, everyone here, will help us to form that and generate that and fill in the plans as we go along. It's definitely a working document under review as we make progress. And there's the link to the document when you find it on the website. So thinking about planning and getting to net zero carbon, when we produce the route map, we try to think of what are the things that, what are the principles behind everything that we do. And we've called these the planning principles. We want to make sure that everything we do is based in theology. This is about treasuring God's creation, and it's more than that as well. There's lots of aspects of what we believe and how we live out our faith that will direct what we do. We want our plans to be urgent, relevant, and widely understood. We're not kicking the can down the road. We know what we need to do and we need to get on with it, and we need to make sure everybody else knows what we need to do and we need to get on with it. We want to be based on evidence and data, and that's where measuring carbon footprint comes in. And I know Jeremy and Mark are both going to talk about that in their talks. And we want it to be embedded in all that we do. So this isn't just something that is important for bursars or ops managers. We want it to be part of our life together. And this is where the strands in the route map and in Eco Church are so relevant, because it's about our curriculum, it's about our formation, it's about the teaching, so that everyone lives this out. And then more practically, it's using less energy from cleaner sources. So we need to reduce the amount of energy that we use, and the energy we buy needs to come from cleaner sources. So it's both of those need to happen at the same time. Travelling sustainably is also part of our in-scope emissions. So we need to make sure we bring down our travel emissions. And that's especially relevant for non-residential colleges, but it's relevant to everyone here. And then finally, offsetting is the last resort. It's what we do to deal with the final remaining emissions that we can't eliminate. It's not something that we do to at the beginning to say, right, we've offset that, we don't need to do anything. So our goal is that the amount of emissions we offset will only be 10% of the emissions that we started with in 2020. So we're aiming for 90% reduction in emissions, and then those that we can't do anything about, if we really can't do anything about them, then it will be offset. And then additional to the actual practical things that you might do with your building, travel also comes into our target for becoming net zero. And we tried to make a rule of thumb as to which bits of travel are relevant, which come under scope. So the rule of thumb is if you're paying expenses for a journey, then those emissions are in the scope of the net zero carbon target. And then so it's finding a way to reduce those emissions. And these are the relevant milestones that dioceses and, where applicable, colleges, schools, offices, and the NCIs, so I work for the NCIs, will develop or update a travel plan. And that travel plan will include not travelling where relevant. Oh, sorry, clicked on too soon. And the second one, that all the institutions will review and update travel expense policies. So the idea is that your policy will encourage the right behaviour. And this is your active travel hierarchy. So the most polluting kinds of travel are at the bottom: air, ICE vehicles, that's internal combustion engine vehicles. And then electric vehicles come next, public transport, even less carbon, cycling, even less walking and wheeling. Or actually, do you need to meet at all? Is this something that you can do in a digital communication? Okay, and then the final thing I wanted to share with you it's afternoon now, it's 12:15, is about Eco-Church. So one of our milestones is for colleges to get the Eco-Church Bronze Award, but we're aware, and I think Mark and Jeremy will share more, that there's quite a few bits of it that don't really apply to colleges, and you think, how on earth are we going to do that? We're going to manage that. So one of the things that
we have lost Jo briefly. We'll just wait for a few seconds and see if she comes back. And if she doesn't, I might hand over to Mark a little bit early and Jo can finish off when she comes back. Meantime, I'll just do a little bit of filling in space, waiting to see if Jo reappears. Right. I think let's hand over to you, Mark, and I'm sure Jo can come in at the end and tell us the last part of what she was speaking about. Welcome, Mark. We'd love to hear about your experience at St Hilda's.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Catherine. And I just want to begin by just saying how encouraging it is to see. Even I'm watching Jo's presentation and just thinking we are not in the place that we were 2 or 3 years ago. And that does feel like progress, and I feel that sense of urgency. This is something we're trying to press ahead with. So I will put in from a St Hild's perspective, and I'm involved in one or two of the things that Jo has mentioned. Just very briefly, I want to speak to the why. What is it that has motivated us at St Hild? And I'm sure is a motivation that people on this call might share. Why is it that we're doing this? And then a little bit about what we've done as a college, how we've learned with others and connected with others along the way. So I hope that's useful. In terms of the why, one of the things that has struck me in a set of conversations with other TEIs, other colleges, is this idea of the Christian college as a thought leader. And so I think it's a really interesting question to us, those of us who work in colleges. What does it mean to exercise thought leadership? And how do we actually address the fact that, as Jo has been saying, we're recognizing this is a key issue, this is an international issue, this is an issue, it's a gospel issue, but it's also an issue where our faith interfaces directly with politics and resource management. And so if colleges want to be thought leaders, then this clearly needs to be something which is at the top of our agenda. And I think that's just really worth us acknowledging at the outset. Certainly that's how it is for St Hild. We as a college recognise that if we want to be thought leaders, if we want to say something of integrity to the church, and if we want to train people theologically, then this is an integral aspect. And last year at the launch event for the Theological Colleges Environment Network, we were receiving some input from Ian Patton, who'd done some work with colleges nationally, and just said, when you're pitching why this is important, try and connect it with the very raison d'etre of the institutions that you're working with. So this is not an add-on. This is actually central to what it means to be a Christian college. So for me, I think this idea of being thought leaders and therefore also leaders in action is crucial. And if I were just to unpack that a tiny bit more, there are three particular elements. To be truth speakers, the gospel speaks truth to us, and Christians are free, set free by God to acknowledge the truth about ourselves, to face that truth, given the grace that we have that enables repentance, that enables change, that enables hope. So if we are truth speakers in our Christian life, surely there must be something about that as in how we address the climate crisis and the ecological crisis that we're in. Secondly, as colleges, I'm sure we all want to be communities of compassion. So again, it's very central to who we are and what we are. That's why this matters. And that compassion needs to be within our communities and their local ecologies, but we're so aware of our international connections and how that compassion radiates out. And thirdly, we want to be prophets of hope. We want to be facing the future with the hope that God gives and acting in hope towards the future, despite the challenges that we're facing. So I just want to foreground those are some key reasons for us. That's what propelled us into this process. And we've been inspired by connection with A Rocha, for instance, all the way through since we launched as St Hild College in 2017. Now, in terms of what we did, the first thing we did was we applied for and received a bronze award. So we were working with the criteria as was. And as Joe has said, there's some really important work being done now to update the eco church criteria so that it is reflective of and useful for colleges. So at the moment, going through the bronze process, and when we considered, I know, Jeremy can talk about working to the silver, you're having to exercise quite a little bit of imagination and latitude in terms of, well, how would this relate to a college? We want that to be much more specific, much more helpful, and to give the college sector much more purchase over what is being asked and how we set mutually encouraging aspirations for progress. But for us, it began with the Bronze Award. And a key development was getting a student eco team. It began with an eco rep. And then enterprising eco reps said, well, actually, I want an eco team. As the principal, I said, well, if you're the eco team, please keep me in touch and let's try and tie up what I'm doing with the council and with staff, with what you're doing with the wider student body. So for some years at St Hild now, we've had an eco rep and their wider eco team. And each year I'll meet with them, especially at the start of their tenure, just to make sure that we're tying up those two wings of our work, the kind of governance, staff and curriculum side on the one hand, and the community and the student-driven stuff on the other side. And driving this forward with students has been a key element of how we've done it and seen significant progress, I think. The third element of background for us at St Hild was the climate emergency. So I was involved with others in helping churches and colleges recognise the climate emergency. And so we worked with TIFund and a range of partners on climateemergencytoolkit.com. And those resources are still there to help recognise the gravity of the situation in which we find ourselves. And as part of recognising a climate emergency, St Hild was committed to getting to grips with carbon measurement and setting a target irrespective of what the national church might be asking us to do. Let me just say one more thing about practicalities. Then what did we actually do? How do we move this forward? Well, I'll mention three things here. First is reporting. It felt to me as the principal of the college that each term when I report to my trustees, the team and we report on, student numbers. We receive reports from students about their welfare and formation. And of course, the trustees have a responsibility to look at the accounts. But it struck me that we weren't reporting in that same way on our carbon. And so what we did is we changed the structure of our reporting to council. So I asked and working with our operations manager to change the format. So we have a non-financial resources report and a financial resources report. And the non-financial resources report is always given first. And that's because people and planet are more important than money. And so every time when our college council meets, that report is given, and that reports on our people, and there's a reporting line on our carbon footprint, on what it is and what we'd like it to be. So I just think reporting is important because it's about visibility, and it's about, and it's, even if at the minute, to be honest, because we've been managing a couple of other things, we're delayed in this year's carbon report. But that reporting line reads, the last carbon report was this, and this is when the next one will be done. So I think reporting was crucial for us in terms of visibility, in terms of changing the structure of the way we think and operate as a college. The second thing that we did was some spreadsheet work. I'm going to hopefully share this with you so you can see it on screen. We recognized that we had to work impressionistically and using estimates and using the best data that we had. So rather than just wait for perfect measurement, we recognized that we needed to just move forward. So Brian, our operations manager at the time, then did a piece of work, which I'm going to share with you on the screen, which just looked at what we felt our key areas were and what change might be possible if we took a different approach. So I will just share this screen with you. As I said, it's very much a working document, but it gives you an idea of the kind of thinking that we were doing. So hopefully you can see here what we did is this was the first draft piece of work, which we then submitted into council. So this was last academic year, 21-22. And you can see that we identified certain key areas. So for us as a non-residential college, travel and catering, also things related to our hiring of premises and our use of IT and a few other things as well. And they're in order of size here. Of course, we didn't know at the time what the different size was. So this was a really helpful exercise to help us get a sense of, even if we're using estimates, what are our big things that we need to focus on. And for us, as you can clearly see there, it's travel. It was 62% of our emissions. I won't go into this in detail. It's something we've used internally, but I just thought I might as well show you. I don't see why it needs to be secret. So each of these links to a page. So with travel, we just worked out, where are our centres, how many people are coming, what's their average distance, what does that give you in terms of mileage? With catering, how many meals are we responsible for, and how do we estimate the potential impact of that, especially if they might be more based on high emission, like beef-based servings or chicken-based, as an example, or if they were vegetarian. We looked at our premises. What's the size of the room? How often is it being used? What might it take for heating and lighting? And IT costs in terms of hours of usage, usage of Zoom. And then we drew on certain sources, whether it's the Carbon Trust, carbon calculating tools of one kind or another. So this is there as something that we can improve and develop on as a college, and we're anticipating doing this work for the current academic year after Easter. And then you'll see that we had to estimate, and we had to sort of work out, what effect COVID had on this. But we had to estimate the difference that changes could make. And there were two key changes that enabled us to achieve something like a 28% reduction. So we worked out we were probably operating at around 100 tons of carbon a year, just over. But we made a couple of key changes to get down to more in what in our calculations was more in the mid 70s. The two changes that we made in particular was number one, we changed our catering to default vegetarian. And so students can order a meat meal for certain times when we're doing, for instance, residential catering, but the default is vegetarian. And we did a piece of kind of communication and student feedback about that. And the second big change we made was to take certain of our sessions to be online. Each of our centres, one in Sheffield, one in Mirfield, they worked online into their rhythm. So maybe an online Monday once or twice a term in Sheffield, or in Mirfield, they took most of the spring term and made it digital. And the centre that we were running in York, where there's quite a lot of dispersed travel, we made that entire centre a digital centre, which is now St Hild Online. So those two changes enabled us to make an impact. And then our question now is, where do we go from here? So I hope that gives you an indication of why this was important to us, the kind of background and the thinking we've been doing. And I'm very excited to be working with Joe and others and with my successor at St Hild about, where do we go from here in terms of calculation and next steps and colleges inspiring each other to make changes.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's so inspiring. Now, I'm just going to check with Joe. I think we were on your last slide at the point that your internet cut out. Is there anything you hadn't told us that you meant to tell us, or shall we move on to Jeremy?
I think we're all good to go on to Jeremy. I think you heard me talking about the Eco College criteria, and that was the last thing I wanted to talk about.
Lovely. In which case, Jeremy, please do feel free to tell us about your experience at Ripon College, Cuddeston.
Thank you so much. A lot of what I'm going to say is going to echo a lot of what Mark has said. We achieved a bronze award in Trinity term, so May of 2021, and a silver just over a year later. So I came into my role as Eco College officer at the end of my first year of ordination training, and then so did all of my second, and now in a couple of weeks I'm handing over to my successor, who's on this call. So good luck, Dav. But one of the things that was extremely beneficial in what we've done the last few years is the institutional buy-in. As an Ordinand who moves through this place rather quickly, we bring a lot of energy, but we also we can't necessarily make those long-term institutional changes without buy-in from the institution itself. So the eco team that we had consisted of the bursar, the finance officer, several members of staff, the head of the kitchen, who's sort of head of the domestic side here at Cuddeston, and then students as well. So what we did is we had the eco church criteria, and we essentially had a member of staff and an ordinand leading each section. And there were some overlaps. So the bursar, for example, did the buildings and land because it just made sense since he was in charge of those things. Worship and teaching was done by a member of academic staff, and stuff like this. And what that enabled were small groups to focus quite specifically on those things and how can they affect changes. And that institutional buy-in has been so important for what has happened. They provide the institution providing the stability, the slow cultural change, and the ordinands essentially providing the energy and being the workhorses that we are. And this buy-in goes all the way to the top, and it's really important. That's our governors in 2021, early 2021, officially declared their recognition of a climate emergency and their intention to join in with the Church of England's 2030 goals of carbon net zero. So that was that, and so we have that buy-in from the very top all the way down. And then it has just been, at least for the last, from that winter, spring of 2021 until autumn of 2022, it was very intense. We put a lot of work in, half-termly meetings with this team, reviewing progress on each area, essentially working through the application again and again, until we were able to find out ways to answer these questions that didn't necessarily apply to colleges, but with honesty and integrity, and trying to figure out how to continue to build a cultural change in this place. So some of the tools that we did to do that were these half-termly meetings, was this large group who would work individually or work in their couplets and then come back together, then go out again. So there's a lot of energy going into it. We also recognize the college's place as it's a residential college that has non-residential pathways coming in and out. So there's a lot of people that we needed to communicate with, but also it's as a college, it also has deep connections with people who have passed through here, who are now in public ordained ministry. And so we used a tool that the principal has, his jottings, essentially is a weekly digital newsletter in term time, where he lays out what's going on and if there are events and things that would be of interest to that very wide kind of community. And in that, we put an eco college message for every week, touching on different things from ethical banking to church land management, in order to continue to communicate and build up the resources that people had. And a lot of that as well was helped by A Rocha's, on the application, all the PDFs that they've been putting up for the last few years that help explain and direct people to how to do this work of becoming a more climate friendly, ecologically friendly church. A few other things that have been really helpful in our sort of journey. For a while, we ran these sort of Eco Tuesdays, because that's when a lot of the other pathways, non-residential pathways, come through Cuddeston, where we would have conversations and people would ask questions. And there was a part-time student who sort of was my counterpart on the PTP, Nicholas, who was extremely helpful in organizing the non-residential pathway side of all those conversations. So he was part of the team, and guest lectures on the subject as well. One of the challenges has been trying to shift the academic culture to embrace sort of ecological hermeneutics and reading different kinds of modes of theology. We are very blessed to have a few academic staff who this is their focus. Margot Hudson is an associate tutor, and a few others. But the overall change that needs to happen has been something we've come against. But we sort of supplemented what was happening in the Common Awards academic side with guest lecturers who could focus in on particular topics. And one of the best buy-ins, as Mark was saying, has been the catering team, who's really helped. They went to a default veg kitchen about a year ago now, actually. After a few years ago, there was a lot of resistance to it, and then after the pandemic, there wasn't any. It was really amazing to see how attitudes have shifted just in the last few years. And so our meat consumption is down over 60%. And the food quality has gone up as well, because better ingredients, vegetable ingredients, focusing on one main meal with a meat side for those who have opted into it. It's been really a really amazing change that has happened. And that affects not just our residential community, but also those guests who come in for retreats or conferences or whatnot. So they're in that system as well. So it's we feed a lot of people, and we feed them default veg. So that's quite exciting. And just some of the challenges that we've been facing. With the A Rocha, as Mark was saying, and as Joe was saying as well, doesn't map quite onto colleges. So A Rocha is very kindly working through the application with TEIs to figure out what fits, what doesn't. Interestingly enough, we have grade 1 listed buildings here. So buildings was always going to be a struggle. But our biggest struggle on the application was the community and global engagement, which is about inviting MPs and whatnot. So that was one where we had to figure out, how do we do these things. And I would love to see, and I think that's something that we with our group, the students who joined our team in this big push that we had. We went through the application so many times, and so we learned how to do it very well, and to do that in parish. So some of the folks who are on that, who've gone off now into public ministry, have done eco church in their parishes because they knew it, they know it very well. And so having a module, or having part of this cultural change in these, Mark's talking about thought leaders, actually practice leaders as well. Ordinands who go out from their colleges into ministry, knowing what to do and how to gather people together to do this work. I think it's going to be really important, and perhaps one of the criteria that A Rocha will touch on in the TEI specific application. But we'll see. A few other, just a close up here, a few other challenges. It is this slow cultural change that needs to happen, and with ordinands coming and going, again, it's that institutional buy-in. I think COVID also was quite traumatic to this place, and not just the ordinands passing through residentially, but actually to the staff who have made this their home and their community and their workplace for many, many years. And so there's a lot to recover and shift culturally while dealing with some of that. So it's been a bit hard sometimes to get that sort of full buy-in. There's been quite a bit, but not the full vision. So I think that's going to continue to be something that needs to happen to really set this place up to reach that goal of 2030 net zero. So that's me, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for telling us about the reality of how you've moved things forwards. It's really, really useful to hear. And it's fascinating hearing from all three of you, really, that whilst there's a very practical side to this about buildings and travel and catering, it's also as much about leadership and communication and culture to make real change. If I can ask all three of you now to turn on your cameras and join me here in the panel. Thank you very much. And everyone listening, if you've got questions, please do pop them in the Q&A, or you can do a thumbs up next to the questions that are already there. So the first question is from Richard, and it's about transport. Isn't walking and wheeling a lower impact activity than digital communications for those Zoom needs? Server farms, for example. I suppose the answer to that is yes. I guess
there's also, if you're coming together in a meeting, it depends what time of year, really. If you're meeting in the winter and you need to heat the room, then that's potentially more. Although if you're staying at home and need to heat your home, that might be more. So I think the difference between digital and people being able to walk is probably swings and roundabout, ups and downs. Perhaps it's not as clear cut as one head of the other. But I think the idea of, are you going to get everyone to travel to your meeting, or is everyone going to be able to join without any travel? Because a group like this, we could never have gathered together without a huge amount of carbon. But a smaller group might be, some people could walk, but some people will have to drive, and then in which case you're digital. But if everyone could walk to the meeting, then you're probably right, the walking would probably be less.
So the next question is from Lucy, who says the practical issues are very different depending on whether the TEI is residential or non-residential. I think that's been reflected in the talks today. Is there a space in the route map to recognise the two categories of TEI and maybe to split into two groups accordingly? I guess there's two questions there. There's kind of a route map question, but then there's also within your TEI network, Joe, that you were talking about, whether there's the groups within that reflect that difference between residential and non-residential. Who am I looking at to say wise words on that question?
I'm happy to start, and then I'm sure others could add. I mean, I think we very much recognise in everything that's been done that there are these are different kinds of institution. I mean, they're the same kind of institution in terms of, delivery of Christian formation, and a lot of what you've been highlighting, Catherine, about, leadership, community, having a vision for what we're doing, massive commonalities, but there are significant differences. For non-residential providers like St Hild, it's quite frustrating that actually some of the key focus of the early statistical carbon management didn't really take account. I mean, I gave you a carbon footprint of 106 tons going down to 76. But some of the reporting forms that only say, well, look, we're only going to scope this. So we're looking at, buildings that you own and staff expense claims. We could have submitted a claim many tens of tons lower than that. So there's a frustration there in terms of how do we actually adequately account for what the expenses are. And to go back to the previous question, it is really difficult to weigh up the difference between a Zoom meeting and an online, and a face-to-face meeting. But I'm glad that we're starting to count, and the more we count and the better we get at this, the more nuanced our judgments will be. On the residential side, I know there's immense concern about buildings, about historic buildings. So in the work we're doing on the eco college criteria, the eco church, soon to be eco college criteria, that will actually recognize this, and it will need to work for both. And I think we just need to recognize in a kind of somatic way, these are different parts of the organizational body of the church, and they work differently. They both bring unique things in terms of what I've seen in residential colleges do in terms of land management, a kind of inhabited ecology. It's really important. So they can learn from each other. But what I think we want to avoid is either side saying, "Oh, we don't count, and we need a special pass." I don't think there are special passes to give out.
And the first step in the route map is to create a net zero kind of action plan that is appropriate to your college, and you'll have any of the actions which are relevant to your college, and they'll be different whether you have buildings or don't have buildings. Joe, was there something you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I was going to say that a lot of the work that we've done in the centre around the route map has been about something that we can work towards, something that we know that we can measure, something we can come and report to at the end of the time. And some of that is constrained by what's actually measurable and what's actually deliverable. We know running alongside of that, there's an awful lot of stuff that we want to influence, that we want to be able to challenge and encourage and develop and change, that is not necessarily going to be very easy to measure and might become measurable as we go along. And that's why we wanted to integrate Eco Church and hopefully Eco College into the route map, because that helps to capture a lot of the things that at this stage we know are important but aren't very tangible. So we want to do those things as well, and we wanted to find a way of including them, even though in terms of reporting it's not terribly easy. So hopefully that helps. That there's stuff that we're going to do when we measure, and there's stuff that we're going to do because we know it's the right thing to do even if we can't measure it.
The next question is about offsetting. That's from Andy asking, so that remaining offset that we know there'll be at the end for the small bit that we can't reduce, Have the Church of England begun to plan how to do this sustainably and to avoid the ill thought out and greenwash compliant schemes?
I think that's me. So the answer is I'm watching and waiting, really, because there are schemes that have come and they've gone. They've come and said, oh yeah, we're legit, and then people have discovered that they're not legit. And as at the moment, we really want to focus very hard on reducing our emissions and having real world reductions. So actually, we don't want people to be offsetting at this stage, because if you've got spare cash floating around that you can use to offset, then we'd much rather you spent it on doing your real world emissions reductions at the moment. So the actual schemes that we might use perhaps don't even exist yet, because things are changing really quickly in the offsetting world. So we have we've got the whole frame in mind and thinking as we approach 2030, that's when we need to start doing that work. So the answer is we haven't actually done it yet, because I think the market is going to be so different in 3 or 4 years' time, and that's when it's sort of planned into our work scheme.
Makes sense. So the next question is about switching to veg, because Jeremy and Mark, you both mentioned switching to vegetarian catering, and somebody has asked, have you found any areas of resistance which have remained?
Well, I can go first with this. So I will say that the current, I can only speak for the current cohort that's here, is very sort of open to these things. One of the issues that has been particularly prevalent this winter is heating. And heating does consist of 73% of Cuddeston's emissions are related to the heating and heat leakage, and this stuff that, you know, I'm sitting in front of a wooden framed single glazed window. It's pretty bad, but the idea of turning down thermostats, there was resistance among people sort of thinking about it, but also among asking for it because of the conditions in which people need to live safely, and also with some of these old buildings, if you don't have your heating blasting, you're going to be growing mold, and the health challenges with that as well. So I think there's both sort of a resistance in terms of lifestyle change, but also in terms of how do we solve this problem? How do we change the structures here to make it safe to heat our homes less, and how do we change the fabric of those buildings, and can we? So like the grade 1 listed building that I'm sitting in, we can't, and we tried, and the council turned down our application for new windows.
And Mark, have you had any areas of resistance?
Yes, and specifically, you know, as you I mean, just to pick up the food thing, which I mean, it's funny how, you know, totemic and, you know, important food is to us. And actually the whole question of ecological awareness heightens our sense of the power of food and the importance of food. So I think we found that we had to work creatively with the catering team. It's not just on their kind of on their A game in terms of when everybody's there, but I think what was difficult, again, Jeremy very rightly have highlighted, you know, the challenge of COVID. You've got people dealing with staffing shortages, and therefore, you know, actually being super creative in your menu planning is harder if everybody feels under pressure. Linked to that, I think we found that some students felt, you know, were less keen, that maybe culturally and maybe even socioeconomically, some people embrace a kind of vegetarian ideal more than others might, depending on what they're used to in their family and local cultural history. So I think with both of those, we've had to just operate a big kind of grace umbrella over the whole thing, which itself is the wider, you know, the wider context in which all this sits. We're a community of grace, and that has to be the case. So that's why we did default veggie. We kind of took a couple of things vegetarian, but with main meals, we still gave people the option and wanted to say, look, you're absolutely free to choose what you want to choose. one student said to me that it had been remarked to him, as Christians, compared with some of the other historic religions, we have been released in terms of Gentile Christians from having a theology of ritualized food. We don't want to bring it back by another route. We have to keep a sense of fundamental grace and freedom in the way that we approach things. So some of now that could be nuanced again, that point. But my thing is that some of the resistance actually is people saying, well, look, you're not counting this right, or the theology is not right. So I think engagement, non-defensive openness, and trying to have a covering of grace and to see it as a community endeavor underpinned by grace has been crucial to us.
I can't remember the exact percentage difference it made, but I remember reading about a study where if people just listed things in the menu the other way around and put the vegetarian items first, because a lot of people will read down a menu they get to the first one they like the sound of. So you could offer the same change, but in same variety, but in a different order, and it would make a difference. It's a really interesting question. It's sort of phrased as a statement rather than a question, but so under the curriculum and formation strand of work, I wonder if we need to do some theological work on why this all matters for our discipleship. How is this rooted in following Jesus and in the kingdom of God, and also in our theology of hope? Why should and do we have hope in these matters, and what is that hope? Do either of you have a reflection on that, Mark or Jeremy?
I can, Mark, if you want to go first, or I can just speak from my experience doing Common Words programs. Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. I think it was Richard who asked about we do need to do theological work, and I've been quite fortunate in having tutors who are very willing to sort of stretch the titles of that they've set for essays, and been able to do some of that, and it's been really valuable. And I wonder if this is some of the things that need to change sort of wider within Common Awards and other sort of academic programs. Like have, in your biblical studies Old Testament module, like have a potential essay question that's about a theology of land there, that not just referring to a promised land, but how does God relate to land and to people, and explore that through an ecological lens, or stuff like this, where if we give TEIs, the resources, then they can potentially implement them and get students to see that they can do some of that theological work. I think more broadly as well, you're absolutely right. Like there is more work that needs to be done. There's some exciting stuff happening, finally, but it does need to happen more.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I know we're running to the end of the time here, so is yes, I think that's right. On the 11th of May at that TCEN digital conference, we will be looking at greening the curriculum, and that's very much the approach we want to take. Certainly, if you talk to TEI principals and curriculum managers, they'll say, "Look, we're always trying to squeeze in extra. Can you focus on this? Can you focus on that?" The best reflection I've heard on this is from Ruth Newton, who says this is not an issue, it's a context. So this is a context that affects everything that we do, and that gives us the capacity to think about how it relates to the various elements of the curriculum, which are many, including the ones that you were mentioning, Jeremy.
I don't know if there's a quick answer to the last question on the list. Do you have ways of considering the pedagogical, I struggle with that word, benefits of in-person and online classes compared with the emissions associated with each?
I mean, my quick response on that was as we mentioned earlier, we need to know more about the precise costs and emissions related to each in order to do the one side of that. But in terms of the pedagogical benefits, I think there are, what we found through COVID was there were genuine pedagogical benefits to be found in digital. First of all, to create broad and sustainable cohorts of students. Second of all, when you're actually learning in context, you can actually have a very interesting kind of reflection when you're actually talking with people, not just from different contexts, but talking to them while they are in their context. You've got, what is the view outside the window? And thirdly, we found that more introverted learners, for instance, massively appreciated several online features, the capacity to use chat, for instance, secure and very creative use of breakout rooms. So it's not without its pedagogical benefits, and I think they could be explored further.
Thank you so much. That's us landing on 1 o'clock. So I will start to bring us to a close. Jeremy, Mark, Joe, thank you so much for speaking us today. I think you've covered such a broad range from leadership and governance right through to practical delivery and things like vegetarian catering. Thank you so much. I'm sure that everyone who has joined today will have taken away some practical actions that they can take next. To everyone who's joined to listen today, thank you for coming. I will send you, before I finish today, the slides and the links from the chat, and the recording will be on our website in a few days' time. I do hope you found it useful, and thank you very much for joining us today. Now let me just save the chat before I bring us to a close. Goodbye, everyone.